do you support suicide bombing against non-combatants in defense of Islam? Okay, it is explicitly a religious formulation of it. And it's suicide bombing, which, as Chris points out, there is a single line in the Quran which seems to suggest suicide is a bad idea. It's suicide bombing against non-combatants. And the support is astonishing. And the support is not, it's interesting to consider what level of support we would find consoling. You know, 2%, 5%, 10%. Well, I mean, 10% is still 140 million people in this world. But there were countries where it was 75% and 80%. And Turkey, the great Muslim success story, was down around 20%. So these are not...
Can I ask you just a question? I don't want to get people too angry, but I'll kick myself going out of here if I don't ask this question. But we had this war in Vietnam, and according to McNamara, 3.4 million people died. Died. Most of them civilians. Right? Most of them civilians. Is there a fundamental difference between killing 3.4 million people with this carpet bombing and Agent Orange or fragmentation bombs and suicide bombing? Is there a fundamental difference between suicide bombing and destroying Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and all of the wood-based cities of Japan in World War II? Is there a fundamental moral difference?
Well, I think that I don't want to speak for a moment in defense of Vietnam or even in defense of Hiroshima and things that could be given a plausible rationale for self-preservation. I think we could not fight war the way we fought war in World War II. We could not firebomb Dresden because we have too much information, because this information plays upon our nascent feelings of compassion, and that's a good thing. I think we should have all the information we can get about the horrors of war so as to inoculate us against going casually onto the battlefield. But yes, suicide bombing is, when you think about it, something that really should be impossible. And it is the least rational thing, even worse than suicide bombing, celebrating these suicidal atrocities of your children, which, Chris, I understand the mothers you have met didn't appear to be doing that, but there's no question that some mothers do that, and this has been widely reported. If you really believe, it's a perfectly rational thing to feel. If you really believe that martyrdom is true, if you really believe that your dead child, who was there a moment ago, is now in paradise waiting for you and you will really be reunited, death is an illusion. And there are people who believe this, and there are people who express this belief violently in conflicts that have nothing to do with us. I mean, the war between Iran and Iraq was characterized on the Iranian side by this massive campaign of suicide bombing, where teenagers were just goaded out to clear minefields by their parents. We weren't involved. This is not, the problem is not urban sprawl and NAFTA and the other degradations that Chris suggests lead people to despair. There's no doubt that despair is a variable, but it matters what you believe in your despair. And again, I would take you back to despairing Janes. They're not going to practice suicide bombing because they believe something different.
Okay, we have to wind this up because otherwise the overtime costs will bankrupt Truthdig and we won't be able to have another event. But I do want to, I know you guys, you'll be going in the car and you'll think, that thing got all screwed up, Cher was a lousy moderator, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't you go first and then you go second and just tell us what we didn't get to that we should have and, put the cap on it.
I think that what Sam is fundamentally talking about is fundamentalism, especially this radical fundamentalism that we see within the Muslim world, that we see it within Jewish groups, certainly within the settler movement in Israel. We see it with Hindu nationalists. Fundamentalism, for me, is born out of desperation and despair. That's why it's growing as a movement. I think at its core, it's primarily secular because its objective is the assumption of power at the expense of others. And I think that finally the only way to fight these movements, both abroad and within our own country, is essentially to re-enfranchise these people within our societies. And if we don't re-enfranchise these people, if we allow our country to become a corporate or oligarchic state, the despotism that we watch deforming lives abroad will deform lives at home.
Well, let me give you a sense of what it's like to be me having this conversation. I mean, it seems to me we could have been having this conversation 500 years ago. And life was difficult 500 years ago. There was a lot of despair. There were crops failed and disease spread, and people suffered just instantaneous and catastrophic changes in their fortune. And it was the cause of all of this actually was well understood 500 years ago. It was witchcraft. And happily, the church had produced some very energetic men who had the gumption to deal with this problem. And so every year, some hundreds and sometimes thousands of women were burned alive for casting spells on their neighbors. Now, imagine what it would be like to be among the 5 or the 10% of people at most who recognize that the very belief in magic, the very belief in witchcraft, the very belief in good witches or bad witches was a malignant fantasy. That the white witches who were helping people with medicinal herbs and practicing midwifery, they were on no firmer ground than the black witches who were casting the evil eye. The whole belief system was at fault. Imagine the kind of criticism you're going to get. No, your problem is just with kind of fundamentalist witchcraft. The reality is that witchcraft is far more nuanced than that, and there's no conflict between science and witchcraft. I mean, science deals with physical law and physical causality, but witchcraft deals with potent spells and the internal connections between things. This idea that somehow we shouldn't call into question these patently bad ideas for fear of offending people, for fear of glossing over their despair, for fear of not criticizing other problems in the world. I would never argue that religion is the only problem in the world or the only source of human conflict, but it is a source, and we are mightily attached to it, emotionally attached to it. And we are loath to criticize it even when it is declaring its ugliest intentions and its ugliest certainties. The problem with the Bible is however you pick and choose, whether you're a literalist or a selective literalist, the problem is there's just a mountain of divisive nonsense in there, and that's where people get ideas about homosexuality being an abomination, and why our country in the 21st century debates gay marriage as though it were the great moral issue of our time. This is coming from religion, and it seems to me that it's time we had an honest conversation about that.
Let me, Okay, let me wrap this up by repeating what I said at the beginning. That I mean, it's a real honor to be with these two people, that they evidence great integrity and courage. I remain an agnostic on their divisions. But I'm thrilled that at Truthdig that we have published both of you, and that I hope we can continue to do that and keep the debate going and the discussion, because it is a very important one to have, and thanks for coming.